What's up, horror fans? It is Danny from the Lassercast here, as always, with Pete, and we are here to talk to you today about a very strangely topical movie that is what I consider one of the unheralded classics of one of the great horror directors of our time, and that is John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. Pete, what's going on? How are you doing this morning?
I think you did a great job there. I noticed that a lot of times when I do the intros, I will just kind of go off on a tangent and won't even say what we're talking about. You did a great job talking about what we're going to be talking about. So I am excited to talk about. Wow, how many times can I fucking say talk about? Um, Prince of Darkness. It's the first time I've ever watched this movie in my life. And one of the things that it was fun when I watched it this time around was I am always putting footage from In Search of Darkness and In Search of Darkness 2 into our videos because we've interviewed David Weiner so much, right?
Of course.
And they always have that image of what's her face? The woman who's like just all corroded
Oh,
and
at
she's
the
like,
end, Father. Yeah.
yes. They always have imagery from her in the trailers, and so I finally got to connect that to a movie today, and I was real excited.
Yeah, definitely. This is a movie. I literally just finished watching it when you messaged me the link, and I was like 5 more minutes. I had 10 more minutes in the movie, and I was like, "Come on!"
Yeah.
I've seen this movie a number of times, and I can honestly say this is one of those movies that gets better with each viewing,
Yeah.
especially from the first time I saw it, because and we'll get into this, but this movie
Yeah.
was nothing like I thought it was going to be from
Okay.
the first time I saw it. Everything about this movie is like deceptive in a way. Before we jump into it, let's just plug some stuff.
Sure.
We have a great interview coming out soon on our channel with Michael Moresi.
Marissa,
Uh,
yeah.
I actually brought him up to a somebody I was going to see Thor, and they were like, "Oh, how's that YouTube channel?" And I was like, "Oh, we just did like a pretty cool interview with a comic book writer and an author. You probably wouldn't have heard of him." And then I mentioned his name, and he's like, "Oh shit, I love it. I love that guy." I was like,
That
"Oh,
is
well,
awesome.
subscribe to our channel, and you'll hear an hour-long interview with him coming up later this week."
Yes.
Uh, you and I did our mid-year review. Best, worst, in the middle horror movies that have come out so far 2022. That's also coming out soon. Charlotte and I
Yes.
did a really fun uh, video where she came home from sleepaway camp. So we watched Sleepaway Camp and we talked about the differences between her experience at Sleepaway Camp and the movie Sleepaway Camp. Spoiler alert, there were not many similarities between her experience and Sleepaway Camp, the movie, but I still love that movie. So it was fun to watch that with her. And
Nice.
you've done like a million interviews. There's one with Brett Nelson who novelized Manborg. That's up on the channel. Laurel Hightower. These are just like in the last couple of weeks. Like you've been an interviewing machine.
That's funny that you say that because on Friday I'm interviewing Tom Deddy, who's a horror writer as well that I met at the Ghoulish Book Festival. And then coming up, I'm also going to be interviewing Robert Essig, who's a horror writer. He has a new book put out by Encyclopocalypse, which is the company that produced that Manborg novel too. And Robert Essig, I love his new book. It's called Circus Oasis. We're going to be talking about that. So just to kind of give you guys dates and stuff, I think that our mid-year review today is Wednesday, July 13th. Our mid-year review is probably going to come out on Friday, July 15th. And then the Michael Moresi video will probably come out on Monday of next week. So you got stuff coming up on this channel. Danny's always putting stuff up. You know, it's weird. We always do this plug and shit at the very end. But now I like this. You're giving people a heads up.
Yeah, let them know what we got going for us. And with that out of the way, we can jump into Prince of Darkness because this is I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, it's funny because I have heard about this movie. I've heard details about this movie. I think there might have been like a kill count that they did on Dead Meat, or it might have just been from actually In Search of Darkness where they were talking about this movie. Oh, and also on Red Letter Media, they did a ranking of all the Carpenter movies, and it was Rich Evans and Jay who did their rankings, and they both talked about this movie, and they kind of praised it a lot. And so I think that it's interesting that when you look at the poster art for this movie, like from its original release and from the VHS, and then you look at this imagery that's behind us right now on the screen, this is for the Blu-ray. It really does paint like two different movies. Because I've seen the cover for this movie many, many times in my life, going to the video store, and I thought of this movie as one thing just based on that art. And then when I see this, I feel like this really captures the movie.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I remember going to the video store and seeing the original artwork for the poster. And then you take into account the title of the movie.
Right.
And I spent the first probably, I don't know, years of my life thinking that this was a vampire movie.
Yeah, right.
I thought this was a movie about Dracula, and obviously Carpenter would make a movie called Vampires in the mid '90s, which is actually not that bad. But I thought always, until I saw it for the first time, that this was a Dracula / vampire movie, and I think because of that, because of the title, because of the artwork on the poster, what I got, I wasn't ready for as probably a 15 or 16-year-old when I saw this movie for the first time. I also was really excited to see Alice Cooper in it because it was post Wayne's World, and I was in like a big Alice Cooper phase. And he is effectively like I even read on IMDb that like Carpenter asked him to just play like soulless and dead behind the eyes, which he does perfectly.
I think so.
Like I thought I was going into this expecting to see Alice Cooper, shock rocker and all sorts of crazy stuff. And yeah, it's just a weird movie, especially for a 15, 16-year-old horror fan who's looking for something to watch, knowing that like at that point in my life, Carpenter was Halloween and The Thing, and Escape from New York, which I just watched the other day, and They Live. And like that was my Carpenter mindset. So like this is such a departure from all of that.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because it feels so different, and yet there's a lot of aspects of it that I'm like, oh, this very much feels like a John Carpenter movie. I think probably the key thing here is the score. That's almost the most telling John Carpenter thing besides the opening credits, right? The opening credits are usually the same. And what was interesting about the opening credits for this movie too is that they're like kind of dispersed between like little scenes introducing the characters, and they go on for like a really long time. Like I remember watching this, I'm like, oh, they're still showing the credits. Like, wow, that's kind of weird, right? But yeah, the score, it's that John Carpenter score, fantastic as always. And then he also has actors that were in Big Trouble in Little China, right?
Yeah, Victor Wong and Dennis Dunn were 1 year removed from Big Trouble in Little China. Obviously, Donald Pleasance,
Right.
Which on IMDb he's listed as priest.
Priest, right?
But I watch almost everything in my house with the closed captioning on, and his closed captioning calls him Father Loomis.
Oh my God, that's awesome!
So somewhere along the line, he was named Loomis in this movie.
Oh man!
Which I at first I was like, did I miss something? And then I went to IMDb and I'm like, oh no, he's just listed as priest. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I mean, there's a bunch more. Like Peter Jason is in this movie. Peter Jason would go on to make 4 or 5 other movies with John Carpenter throughout the rest of the 80s into the 90s. He's like the head of the rebels in They Live. He's also in The Mouth of Madness at the beginning. So he would go on to become a recurring actor for Carpenter. But Carpenter was always recycling and reusing his like core group of actors.
Yeah. And then you have, of course, Jameson Parker playing the character that's like the fusion of me and my best friend Brian Marsh.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I like that. Like he's constantly introducing himself in the beginning of the movie. Brian Marsh, Brian Marsh. I'm like, hey, it's my last name, and then it's my buddy's name too. And he was kind of a weird, like just a weird person to have in the cast. He kind of was giving off the sort of like '80s porn star vibe kind of thing. Yes, the mustache. That's probably it. Yeah, the stash and his little flirtation with what was it? Lisa was his love interest, right? Played by
Yeah,
Catherine Danforth.
Lisa Blount, the actress, she died
Oh,
very young. I think she was sick, and she died like very young. So, but
yeah,
she was. I thought the cast was good. I mean, Dennis Dunn has a few lines in this movie that probably wouldn't hold up under modern day scrutiny. And
yeah,
I kind of like that about it because I feel like one of the things that gets lost is as a history person, like it, sometimes you just hear things or you see things and you go time capsule it to that period. And like the fact that he's making these kind of off color, sexist, racist jokes, I'm like, oh, this is an 80s movie. And like this is one of the things that you kind of look back and you go, yeah, like the 80s just wasn't as PC as it
PC.
is today. You can get away, like nobody overlooking the script is going to go, oh no, you got to take that line out,
Right, right.
even
Yeah,
you mentioned, what is it, Jameson
Jameson Parker,
Yeah,
Brian
like
Marsh.
when he's flirting with Lisa at the beginning, he's like, oh yeah, I'm an open sexist. And I'm
Right.
like, who would say, like, that's like a cancelable line if you ever are like out with a woman in 2022 and you're like, yes, I'm a sexist, and yep, there she goes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like,
Check, please. Right.
yeah, exactly.
It's funny, right? Because this movie has the living embodiment of evil in a tube, and I think that maybe like that could also be Twitter too, right? And I think that if we expressed these points on Twitter, we would get canceled right away, just saying like, "Oh, it's cool that it's a time capsule, or it shows a different time." But there's something to it. It like to me, I was born in '82. Seeing something that comes out in '87, it's like this kind of reminds me of like what I grew up watching and stuff, right? And it's just like when you see movies where there are people smoking left and right and kids cursing and things like that, it's just like that's what we saw when we were growing up. And I'm not saying that it's good to be sexist, it's definitely not good to be racist or anything like that, but it does kind of show you like what the people were like back then. And what's interesting about this movie is that one critic said that it was a metaphor or a parable for the AIDS crisis, which was just like raging on at that point, right? And you mentioned Dennis Dunn and his kind of interesting off-color lines, but he makes these sort of like homophobic or like gay kind of lines, and then there's this one scene at the very end where he's like literally trapped in a closet, and then women come after him, and he's scared of the women. So this one critic was saying that basically it was like a metaphor for AIDS and the fact that it was like a communicable disease that people were spreading to each other. You know?
I mean, I wouldn't put it past anybody. I mean, Carpenter obviously in the 80s got very socio-political. I mean, They Live can't be seen as anything other than a criticism of Reagan America in the
Yeah.
80s. He wasn't exactly hiding that. And
Right.
so, Reagan obviously was very uh, uh, indifferent to the gay population in the 80s. I could see that definitely. I mean, even
Yeah.
the idea that, what is one of the existential questions of this movie is what is the evil? And it's this like green liquid in a jar. And and what is it? How did so it's not until the very end of the movie that evil takes a physical form. And again, it could be, I think this is one of those reasons where I said at the beginning, this movie gets better every time you watch it, because a, a lot of the things Carpenter mentioned, like Carpenter's movies, especially this is part 2 of his unspoken apocalypse trilogy with The
That's right.
Thing and In the Mouth of Madness.
Yes.
Those 3 movies, I mean, because people said the same thing about The Thing. The Thing is, it's a parable for AIDS because it's a monster that all they have to do is touch you and it absorbs you and it kills you and it
Yeah.
turns you into this thing, and you the blood test and everything,
Yeah.
and all the dread and the paranoia about who you're with, and is there something evil inside of them. That was something that was prevalent in The Thing, in this movie, and in The Mouth of Madness. And
Yeah.
here we are where I don't even want to dare say this phrase post-pandemic, because we're not.
We're
I mean,
not.
my aunt and uncle just came down with COVID. I was supposed to spend the weekend upstate. All those plans got canceled. I had COVID just a few months ago. So we're not really post-pandemic, but there is this idea that still between COVID, monkeypox, the media, that there's still evil inside of us. And, we have to wear the masks and everything to keep it, it's one of the reasons Carpenter's always been my favorite filmmaker. Because his work feels evergreen. It just never feels dated.
Yeah.
It always reflects to what is going on today. He's like the horror movie director equivalent of like George Carlin comedy, where it made perfect sense as counterculture in the 70s and 80s, but now it's real. And like it actually becomes almost like philosophy today.
Yep.
And Carpenter's horror movies feel like that. Like they were speaking out against the evils of the time, but those evils just don't go away, and they're even scarier now. So the horror movies are even scarier now.
Yes. Wow, that is such an awesome point. And I think it's so apt to compare John Carpenter to George Carlin, because I think even just on a physical level, the two remind me of each other, and kind of both their attitudes. They're both kind of badasses for their field, right? John Carpenter's a badass, even though they're these kind of like real skinny white guys. They're these like badasses in their field, and so many people have respect for them in their fields, right? It's interesting because I actually have this thought very often. I'm really glad you brought this up, because I think about like when George Carlin was around and the things that he would say in his stand-up routines, and it would seem like he was so extreme and so over the top in that time. Like, whoa, I can't believe this guy is saying this, and this is so dark. But like what you just said, it's like so on the money. Like the things that he warns us about, the things that he's like, hey, you guys don't know this, but this is the actual truth. It's like, oh my God, it's like so in our face these days. And you're right, it's the same thing with John Carpenter's films. How often when people are complaining about our modern culture, do they use the imagery from They Live? And they use like a meme where it has Roddy Piper put on the glasses and showing the secret messages behind it.
Kids today walk around in obey shirts because it's a trend now. And they don't realize that like a movie that was countercultural and anti-consumerist is now being used to sell t-shirts.
Right.
Like there's a lost irony there.
Right. And it's so interesting because, these movies came out when we were kids, right? Maybe we got exposed to them years after they came out, or in your case, maybe even closer when they came out. But like, we're growing up with these things and they seem so dark. They seem so nihilistic and they're in the future. But then I always thought, like, does Carpenter think when he's making this movie, does George Carlin think when he's making this comedy, like the world is going to end, we're just 2 steps away from the apocalypse? Do they have these like negative thoughts decades ago? Because like when I was young and I would watch a movie like this, I'm like, oh, this is a scary idea, but we're safe. We're going to just go back to normal. I'm going to go eat at McDonald's tomorrow and, watch some TV later. Nowadays, when I think about the world, I'm like, shit, do my kids have a future? Do I have a future? Like, it's 108 degrees in Texas right now. Like,
Oh,
what's going on? You know, like
I'm going. I mean, it's 90 in New York. It's been 90 for like 5 straight days,
yeah,
and I'm going. And my buddy who lives in Louisiana, I'm going there on Monday. He keeps sending my other friend and me. He keeps sending us weather reports where like at 10:30 in the morning, it's 104 degrees going up to 114, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go for a run next week.
yeah. Maybe don't do that, man.
Yeah,
I like having a co-host. You know.
yeah,
It's just like, because that's the whole thing about this movie, right? And I feel like this is a thing that is in Carpenter movies. This movie cost $3 million to make, and I know that's a lot of money for the time, but it's not necessarily a huge budget for a movie, even in 1987. I think that John Carpenter, and you can probably kind of confirm this or deny this, but he's really great at getting a lot out of a small budget and not having a lot of money to work with. And
yeah. He
I think that.
also
Go
he also purposely made this movie. He made this movie coming off of Big Trouble in Little China, which was a box office bust, pretty much. And so he basically left the studio system, and he
Okay.
made this and They Live with, I think, a much smaller production company that
Yeah.
basically he was fronting. And so he wanted to get away from the studio system, and he wanted to have more autonomy over the projects. But yeah, I mean, you look, I've heard people criticize They Live because, oh, the aliens look so stupid, and I'm like, that's not the point. Like
No.
it, and like the point is that they do look that kind of exaggerated because that's what we're missing.
Yeah.
Like, how can you possibly miss something that outrageous?
Right.
And yeah, so I think, I was reading on IMDb that, like, Carpenter by this point, he basically had almost all of his movies were just bombing at the box office and then finding new life on VHS and like video store rental. And he was basically living off, I don't mean living off like he was, but like he was money wise, he was really making the money from these movies back on home video.
Yes. And see, like that to me is so interesting because, you know, in one of the articles I read in research for this, they were like basically like this is yet another movie that has a cult following. It's like typical for Carpenter movies to have a cult following. And when I watched this movie, it reminded me of being a kid on a Saturday watching a movie on like Channel 9 or Channel 11. And it's like a sort of like a, I'm not gonna say like a grindhouse because it's not like that, but that's sort of like that B movie sci-fi kind of movie. And it's interesting because it feels like that, but Carpenter's movies are like the proto version of these movies. He always makes like the definitive version of it, and then there's so many derivative copies of his initial movie that he makes. There's the derivative version of The Thing. There's a derivative version of this movie. There's a derivative version of They Live, right? And of course of Halloween. Goddamn, there's so many fucking Halloween
Yeah.
ones, right? But why this makes me think of like that Channel 9, Channel 11 kind of movie on a Saturday is because it's got that cast of characters. It's like in one location. It's so cheap and efficient to basically use like one building for your movie and just kind of keep using shots throughout this building. And it's super high concept. We're talking about like fucking quantum physics and like God and reality, but yet it's just people in a church,
Yeah.
right? So
And
go ahead.
I think that's part of why I like rewatching this every once in a while, because I think the movie is much smarter than me, and I'm always picking up on new things. I'm always I love I made a joke to Chris one time, like, this is my favorite movie, my favorite horror movie of all time that uses quantum physics and tachyons. What the fuck is a tachyon? I don't know.
Right?
but
Right,
but
right.
this movie makes me think it has to do with like the anti-God particle in a green jar that's been hidden by the church for thousands of years, and I'm like, oh, okay. Uh,
Yeah, it's this amazing thing. It's this amazing fusion because it's just intellectuals. It's just like college students in a church at night in the middle of the night, and yet it's the whole fate of the fucking universe, right?
yeah,
It,
I'm just I was just rewatching it, and I was really mad at myself because I was in LA for a week in February, and I went to the Myers house. I went to the houses that were used at the end of Halloween. I went to the Nightmare on Elm Street house. Like Charlotte and I went to a bunch of locations, and you can watch those videos here on the channel. But I looked up the church from Prince of Darkness was like 25 minutes away from where my
ah,
hotel was.
yeah,
But the problem is in LA, we were there during the week. So the problem is 25 minutes away is really over an hour because
right,
it's going to
right.
take you over a half hour to get there with traffic over. And I didn't want to like take the rental car away from the family for over an hour while we were on vacation in case. So like I never got a chance to go there, but now I'm like rewatching it. And I'm like, shit, I would have really loved to have a picture in front of that church. Like,
Yeah, yeah. It's a real interesting looking building, and it's kind of funny because like so many of my interviews that I've done kind of are from the Ghoulish Book Festival, right? Like Brian Asman, Laurel Hightower, Tom Detty, who I'm going to interview. Like these are all people I met at the Ghoulish Book Festival, and I can't remember who posted on Twitter, but they posted a picture of the Ghoulish Book Festival, which was inside of a building that is also used as a church and a bowling alley, and then this building from Prince of Darkness. So they're like, how did they find the building that is like the Prince of Darkness building? But this is in San Antonio, though. But I kept looking at the outside of this building. I was like, oh shit, that's the Ghoulish Book Festival. I was waiting for Alice Cooper to show up.
yeah.
Yeah. But we should talk about a couple other behind the scenes details that are real fun though, too. One of the other interesting details is that the John Carpenter, he wrote the screenplay, but he wrote it as
Martin
reference.
Quatermass.
Yeah, right, right. And that's a reference to a British hero that's like kind of from these like sci-fi movies, very kind of similar to Doctor Who, because he's always kind of facing off against these like extraterrestrial threats, and he's just like super smart. And what do you call it? The guy that created Quatermass, he didn't want that name associated with this movie. He was kind of upset that they referenced him or paid homage to him because he didn't want to be connected to this movie.
He
But
did that a lot, though, Carpenter. He wrote They Live under a pseudonym also. Uh,
oh, okay.
yeah, he would often he would often attribute the screenplay to himself under a pseudonym. Now it's gonna bother me because I know the name he used in They Live. Hold on,
Well,
I have it behind me.
okay. Well, maybe while you're looking that up, I can throw another little detail that makes me happy. That Alice Cooper, he impales that one guy at the beginning of the movie, and that thing that he impales the guy on is from his live show. So I thought that was really cool that like it's a prop that he uses in his like because Alice Cooper has that over the top stage show,
Oh
and
yeah,
so
I've
he
seen him
uses
do
that.
that on stage. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Okay, perfect, perfect.
Oh,
Yeah,
before I
go ahead.
forget, he wrote They Live as Frank Armitage. So that's John Carpenter also. So it's like he's done that before. But yeah, I saw John Carpenter. I saw Alice Cooper in Camden a couple of years ago, and amazing stage show. And he does the bicycle trick. And I actually met. I don't want to say I met him, but he was at the Great Philly Comic Con. I'm gonna go 2017 or 18, and Athena and I went, and he was doing a Q&A, and I actually got to ask him about like my question, of course, was, what was it like working with John Carpenter, even for the few days that you were there on the set of Prince of Darkness? And he talked about like doing the trick and how he showed it to Carpenter, and Carpenter was like super excited to like have that being used in the movie.
Yeah, that is so cool, man. Yeah, he's a legend, and it's cool because like his agent was one of the producers on the movie. That's how he got into this movie, and I think he does a fantastic job. The shots of those homeless, and they say like homeless kind of schizophrenic people, the real creepy stuff. Like if you want to talk about like the horror aspect and what is scary about the movie, it's really just the people kind of standing and staring blankly, as in like, you know, they're just vessels. They're just being used, right?
Yeah.
I think go ahead.
Oh no, and I think again with The Thing, I think this movie and The Thing are the best examples of Carpenter just using dread, like that feeling of dread, where nothing's really happening yet, but you know something is there. You know, it's not like Halloween. Halloween is scary because you know there's a slasher killer out there. He's wearing a mask. You can literally, in most shots, you can see him behind the characters.
Right.
In these movies, and again, they're linked because of his, Apocalypse trilogy. There's just this overwhelming feeling of dread every time the characters go outside and they turn around, and there's just a row of silent, almost robotic. It reminded me of Halloween Season of the Witch.
Yes, yes.
The androids in Season of the Witch are like even the way they stand, just like silent, like almost robotic vessels was the word you used, which is real in this movie is a great way to describe them. And that woman who thanks Donald Pleasance for reopening the church, and she's holding a cup of maggots and the bugs everywhere. Like, growing up, there was nothing I hated more aside from clowns than bugs. And like, I'm still a 40-year-old man who, if like there's a water bug in the bathroom, I'm gonna like freak out and run out before I like realize, oh wait, I'm a man, I'm supposed to go kill it.
Yeah.
So like all of those scenes, even now, I'm like sitting in bed watching it, and I'm like, yeah.
Probably the best effect in the movie and the kind of creepiest moment is when there's that man who's just like covered in bugs and his body breaks down. You know, he's like, I got a message for you, and he's like, pray for death, right? And what I thought was really effective is when his body was breaking down, you know, his head falls off, his arms fall off, his legs fall down, and then his like torso drops, and then it like falls. That moment when the torso drops and then falls over, that was like really effective to me. I was, that bothered me a lot.
Yeah.
So we should talk about like the actual like presence itself and like what is happening, right? Because essentially, and this is another thing too, like we talk about how small the budget is, but I think the canister that's containing the like living embodiment of evil, I think that's like very well shot. And considering it's just a tube of green liquid, it gives off that feeling of, oh my God, this is fucking evil. Like, this is a powerful thing. I think that's so well shot. And like the noise they use and then the music, it's just this great setup for that.
Yeah. I love the duality of the religion versus science. And I love that this movie, one of the only movies that frames them as allies working together, where like the first thing that the priest Donald Pleasance thought to do was to go to the quantum physics professor and have him bring in his crew of physicists and linguists and all of these incredible intellectuals and help him stop this ancient evil and like what evil is. And like, I love the scene where the woman she's the translator, the transcriber, and she's transcribing the book that's been there for like thousands of years and has been written and rewritten. And she talks about how like it's the father of Satan enclosed the evil in this jar and melted it down. And they ask Donald Pleasance, the priest, how did the Roman Catholic Church keep this a secret for 2,000 years? And his answer is amazing. His answer is, we basically just lied to humanity. We
Right.
told the stupid humans that evil was a spiritual force, and then we acted as the salesman, and we sold that, and we killed anybody who spoke out against it. They even talk about how Jesus knew what was going on, and that, you know, Jesus was going to speak out against it, and that's why he was killed. And I'm like, this
Yeah.
movie is going in so many crazy directions. Like, this is why, like, in many ways, this movie is nothing like 2001: A Space Odyssey. But my journey with this movie is very similar, because I saw 2001 when I was like 14, and I had no time for that movie. It was too slow. It was boring. What's going on? Why are there monkeys on the screen for 20 minutes? Why is Ric Flair's music playing? I got no time for this. And then I saw it in the movie theater on like IMAX a couple of years ago. And I think it was probably 2018. I think it came out in 68. So maybe it was the 40 or 50 year anniversary.
Sure.
And my mind was blown. And I was like, God, I was so stupid when I was younger. This movie's amazing. And when I first saw this, I didn't hate it. But like I said, I thought I was going to be renting a vampire movie. And I was like, what the fuck is this green jug and tachyons and physics? And what are we talking? And now that every time I've watched it since then, I've gotten just so much more from it. It's such a philosophical movie. Like, if you read about Carpenter, like really wanted to make something different with this movie. And I think it's also kind of coincidental that we're talking like the day after they released the photos of like the Big Bang from the telescope, because like they actually talk about like deep space and particles. There was like a supernova that they show on TV in this movie, and the supernova is light years away, and it's particles are falling from space. And they even mention that the green particle could be extraterrestrial. And it's just like, the fact that I rewatched this movie after spending a day and a half looking at that image of all the galaxies and everything, I'm like, the timing is just perfect.
Yes. I love that feeling when it's like, whoa, that's weird. We're like talking about this movie, or, you know, we're thinking about this when this is happening in history right now. It's interesting because like we chose to watch this movie because it's on Shudder right now. That's for July. This movie's come out on here. And it's such a like a comic book type concept. It's like real hardcore science fiction, but like one thing that comic books do so well is they kind of like will blend the genres together. And this is definitely like horror and science fiction wrapped in one, you know. And you were talking about how they mentioned Jesus at one point, and I was just thinking about like an audience in 1987 listening to some guy. One thing that's real interesting is that Victor Wong is playing like the main professor that everyone listens to, right? And I think that must have been real inspired casting at that time, because in 1987, if you're going to have this like wise professor, I'm assuming it would be like a white man with like a, you know, white beard, you know, giving his knowledge to all these kids, or maybe a British white guy. But no, they're the Asian man, and I just really liked that aspect. You know, go ahead.
Carpenter got him and Dennis Dunn back from Big Trouble in Little China, where, again, as a kid, you watch Big Trouble in Little China, and all you think about is how cool Kurt Russell is. He's the hero. He's not at all the hero in that movie. In fact, Victor Wong is the one that leads them in. Dennis Dunn is the one who is really going after the damsel in distress in that movie. So, you know, Carpenter in 1976, his first real breakout movie was Assault on Precinct 13, where the main character, the hero of that movie, is a black police officer.
Yeah.
You have obviously Childs in The Thing is one of the survivors at the end. Um, in Escape from New York, the Duke is played by Isaac Hayes, and he's the king of New York. So, Keith David again in They Live is one of the two main characters.
Right.
He was always casting in a way that and spreading the roles out. I think somebody said that. I read one review, or maybe it was Carpenter, who said like Big Trouble in Little China, Kurt Russell's character is a character who thinks he's the hero, but is really the sidekick. And that's
Right.
like the perfect way to describe him in that movie. But yeah, Victor Wong, back to back years with Carpenter, essentially is playing the lead hero. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, the movie does kind of make you go like, oh, mustache guy is, he said hello to that woman and then they're in bed, because that's what happened in every 80s movie. It's like,
Yes. Yes.
hi, nice to meet you. I'm a sexist. Want to see this card trick? And then camera pan, they're in bed together. And you're like, what?
Yeah. Hey man, his last name's a Marsh. He must have some good moves, But like, just going back to, because I want to talk about Brian Marsh and his girlfriend, and then the end of the movie too, because I think that's a real interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make sure that we talked about the parallels between like God and Satan and Jesus and stuff in this movie, because when uh when Victor Wong is talking to Donald Pleasance and they have that discussion about evil, and Donald Pleasance says that thing about being salesmen and tricking humanity, they do mention Jesus, and they say that he is actually an extraterrestrial that looked like a human. And now you're kind of going into this kind of territory where there's like, oh, aliens visiting Earth and all this kind of weird stuff, and aliens that look like people. That's real interesting stuff, and it's so like out there and bizarre. What's interesting about this movie is that they talk about the idea of, well, particles have, there's matter and there's antimatter, right? There's the one part that's good, and then there's like the anti part. And they're basically implying that there's like an anti-God, and that Satan, instead of being like one of God's angels, is the child of this anti-God. And in this movie, you have this sequence that's like Mary being impregnated by God and having a baby, but it's twisted and bizarre. You have this one woman it's Susan, who's very pleasant, by the way, like before all this shit happens to her. Really friendly, nice lady. She gets this bruise on her arm, and she's like, "Oh, I got this random bruise. It must be from stress," right? And then you see it's this weird shape, and that she's going to be the vessel for this evil. And they have this sequence that's just so fucking disturbing, where she's in the bed and the green stuff has gone up to the ceiling, and then it eventually is like just shooting into her eyes and her mouth like a fucking Coke machine, right? Just like spraying into her orifices. And then at one point, like her stomach is all extended or distended, whatever they call it. Her skin eventually becomes like kind of like, it looks like she's burnt. All this horrible stuff happens to this woman, and it's kind of like the inversion of Jesus, right? It's like, because the idea of Jesus is that like God impregnated Mary through immaculate conception. She gives birth the natural way, just like any child. In this, it's like she's just fucking evil's poured into her, and then it contaminates her body, and then she herself is the vessel. And the stuff that she does when she wakes up, it's like real creepy. Her faces, she always seems like very happy and sort of childlike, and she has telekinetic powers. At one point, Donald Pleasance chops off her arm, it grows back. He chops off her head. She picks up her head. I really liked the sequence with her as the vessel.
Yeah. I also like you mentioned her facial expressions. I think this movie gets a lot of that really well. Jesse Lawrence Ferguson he's an actor. He plays Calder, the black guy, and he, from the minute he's like inside, he has this like like horrific panic look on his face. And then like he starts to like later on he is trying to get everybody together and he's kind of like trying to make jokes to like almost break his own tension. But then he ends up getting like taken over and infected with the the green particle, and he just the look on his face from that point on, he like kills himself and then he comes back to life, and he's the whole idea with the mirror too, and how there's a mirror dimension and maybe the anti-god lives in the, and then that ties back to a conversation that was had earlier with Schrodinger's cat, and like maybe when we look in the mirror, that's the mirror is the reality and we're just a reflection.
Yes.
And then that like I said, I've seen this movie probably 10 times. I am still 100% sure that I don't fully understand it, and that's why I keep revisiting this movie, because it's so weird and it's so thought-provoking and philosophical and existential, and it just makes me think and go a little crazy as I watch it, and I love it for that.
Yeah. What the character's name was Calder that you were just
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah, Calder. The way that I interpreted his sequence where he's kind of smiling, then he's like, just in pain or just upset. I took it that like the man inside was like fighting against the presence that was taking him over. That's why he like kills himself. And when you go to watch the movie on Shudder, that's the image. Once you click on the movie, it shows him like killing himself and that kind of like pained, kind of crazed look on his face. He did a fantastic job. I mean, he did a great job. And then the woman that played Susan did a fantastic job. Donald Pleasance is always great. One other image that kind of sticks out besides just Susan's sort of burnt face and her kind of crazed, kind of childlike look and saying "Father" as she's looking into the mirror. One other image that really stood out was the image that people would see in the Brotherhood of Sleep. Like everyone would share that dream. And it looked almost like it was from a movie that was more modern. And I think the reason why is because they were using video footage. Like what Carpenter did for those dreams is he would film the sequence in the church with a video camera, and then he would film the video footage on a TV screen. And that's why it has that kind of grainy look. And then Carpenter himself is saying the narration where it's like, this is from the year 1999. And I like that. We talked about the band Gunship with Michael Moresi in our interview with him. And I mentioned how I love their songs. They have this one song that opens with a narration by Carpenter. And it's this new narration. He's talking about like the apocalypse. And those clips always reminded me of that part of the song where they're like, it's the year 199. But I just love that shot where they're panning around to the front of the church, and then there's this like shadowy presence coming out through the door. That maybe is the coolest thing in the whole movie. What do you think of that sequence?
I mean, it's very haunting. Again, it's because and every time you watch it, every time somebody has a dream, the year, another number appears, and then at the end, it's Lisa, because like that we didn't mention Lisa, like the combination to stop the evil, because the Susan is going to pull effectively the devil out of the mirror reality, out of that dimension, and in order to stop that, she like tackles her into the mirror, and then Donald Pleasance throws the axe at it to break the mirror, to like shatter the doorway, the gateway. And so basically one of the heroes of the movie is trapped now, and that in like this mirror reality with the entity, and father. So you have like the father of Satan and the embodiment of Satan together. And I like that it makes the movie feel like it continues on, because this movie obviously came out in 1987, and they're all having a vision of a transmission from 1999.
Right.
So maybe that was like Carpenter's way of saying at the end of the millennium, like it's going to come back. And
Right.
yeah, like somebody, I think I read Alice Cooper said that he would love there to be a sequel to this movie. And like I wouldn't want just Joe Schmo to make a sequel to this movie. If
No.
John Carpenter was going to make a horror movie for the first time in over a decade, and he was going to make a fourth apocalypse film, he doesn't have to call it Prince of Darkness 2. He could, call it whatever he wants. But if it was in some way a spiritual sequel to this, almost like a Prometheus to Alien kind of thing, I would be totally down for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be amazing. I would love to see someone do something with like a budget for this, just kind of tackle these kind of concepts. Yeah, I mean, I feel really bad for which I wrote down Lisa Blount. Is Lisa the character? Or is Catherine Danforth the character?
Oh,
Who's the actress?
yes. We keep calling her Lisa. The actress's name was Lisa Blount. Catherine Danforth is the character. Yes.
Okay,
I
so
remember because
Catherine.
everybody, as you mentioned, everybody introduces themselves by their full name in this movie, especially at the beginning. Hi, Brian Marsh. I'm Catherine Danforth. And I like how they're both like, I know. What? Like, what, did you listen to the professor taking attendance? Like, it's
Right,
weird.
Catherine does this ultimate sacrifice, and I feel so bad for her when she jumps through there. And I like how they shot that. They must have shot her like in a pool or something, because she's just kind of floating there in that realm of the anti-god, and she's just beyond the mirror, and you can see her face. That's such a horrible fate. And the movie itself has a sort of Inception-like ending where Brian Marsh, he has a nightmare where he now sees Lisa, right? And then he wakes up, and then there's a second like that, nightmare where it has two scares. He turns, and then she's in the bed, and she looks like Susan now. Then he wakes up again, and he goes over to the mirror, and right before he can touch the mirror, it cuts, just like Inception in the top. It's very possible Christopher Nolan was inspired. One thing that I thought might have also been inspired by that particular sequence was in The Matrix, the very first Matrix, when like Neo touches the mirror and his finger.
Like,
yeah,
definitely.
Right. So I was thinking that too.
Yeah. I really enjoy. We were talking about like what would a sequel look like? What would if this movie had more money? I think kind of, and you mentioned like the look of the canister that's holding this green liquid, how cool it looks. It looks ancient with like the kind of sludge grime all around it.
Yes.
I feel like if this was made by a lesser director, or if an idea, then it would have almost been cartoonish, where we would have seen like they would have treated the characters like zombies, where like even the homeless people would be outside like, and they would try to do some over the top special effect at the end where,
right.
I think like there's part of me that just really loves the idea that it is a comically red devil hand that comes out of the mirror. Like they're not making any bones about this at all. Like that is like if you asked a 9-year-old to draw the devil, they would probably draw a big red cloven hoofed monster, and
Right.
that's the hand that's getting pulled out.
Right.
Almost like a live action. It almost looks like Tim Curry in Legend,
Right.
or
Hellboy.
a live action version of Satan from South Park is being pulled out of the mirror, but you only see the hand. So
Right.
it's not an over the top effect. It's not like a cartoonish looking effect. It's just the idea that we as the audience know, oh shit, this isn't like quantum physics, tachyons, whatever. No. This is real. They're pulling the fucking devil out of the like mirror realm now.
Yeah.
And I just love that. Like, it doesn't give too much, but it gives you just enough.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's an ambitious movie. That's for damn sure. And it's so funny because I keep saying this, but it's like this ambitious movie with talking about pulling, this literal devil from the dark dimension into our world, but it's just a bunch of students and academics in a church. And it's a lot of fun. It kind of can be kind of goofy with the spraying the water from their mouths. It looks sort of like that spray gun that the dentist does to like clean your teeth,
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm willing to deal with that, with the idea of like it being like a communicable disease, and that it's this vial of evil, that's this liquid evil. So that's how they're spreading it. It's very like Doctor Who. This whole movie feels like an episode of Doctor Who,
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, like way creepier and apocalyptic.
Also, just random. Do you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
I don't.
Oh, because the guy who plays Mullins in this movie, the kind of bald guy, the big guy who gets his neck broken, he's Hitchcock on Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, he comes back, and then he's one of the many people that when the evil disappears, like little smoke comes out of their mouths. I kind of felt bad for the innocent people that got taken out in this movie. But I don't know. I liked it. I recommend it to Carpenter fans. I recommend it to horror fans. I am a huge fan of those sort of Saturday afternoon movies. And this, like, Carpenter just always does those, but does them the best,
Yeah. I know that Alamo is doing a summer of Carpenter. Charlotte and I went to see The Fog in theaters. Aside from seeing The Thing, which we did through Fathom Events, that was the one Mick Garris ripped apart because they didn't show the right transfer. But we did see The Fog at Alamo, and I do think this is playing at Alamo at some point during the summer. Yeah. So if I'm home, if I'm not traveling, I'll definitely try to go and see it.
Nice.
If you just look, I mean, like, I know it's beyond us to just sit here and wax poetic about somebody who is considered the greatest horror director of probably the last 50 years. But if you just look at a 10-year period, he did Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing, Christine, Starman, Big Trouble Little China, Prince of Darkness, and They Live. 9 movies between 78 and 88. That's insane. When, like, the worst movie you make in a 10-year period, I don't even know what I would call the worst. Probably maybe Christine, because it's a killer car movie. But, like, even then, the movie's freaking cool as hell. And it has one of my favorite Carpenter scores in it. It's just, what a freaking run of horror and sci-fi and a blending of the two. And if you include all the stuff with the music and the fact that, like, none of these movies, aside from Halloween, were, like, commercially viable hits, it's just baffling. Like, today, he would make, like, today, directors get, like, one chance to go from, like, indie filmmaking to blockbuster. And if you fuck up the blockbuster, you're done. Like, you go, like, you go back to wallow in independent filmmaking forever. And in the 80s, like, Carpenter had the greatest independent movie of all time. At the time, Halloween was the most successful independent film ever made. And then a bunch of movies that really didn't do great in the box office and were critically panned. And, today, because of streaming, really, you don't even have that, like, ability to find new life on VHS. Like, a lot of times your movie will get dumped onto a streaming service with very little fanfare, and it's up to your audience to accidentally stumble upon it. Almost.
Well, actually, honestly, it's up to people like us, right? Because a lot of times we will, we'll have a channel, and then it'll just be like, oh, you guys should check this out. You should check this out, I mean, Shudder is really good at like talking about what they have coming out. Like Shudder's sort of like the exception, but like things like Netflix and
Yeah.
you really need someone to kind of guide you with Netflix and
Yeah,
Hulu.
but like you've said this a lot. You said this to Michael Moresi during our interview, and we've talked about this with David Weiner. Shudder really is, for horror fans, the closest thing we have to a video store. They actually have a section of Carpenter classics now. So they have Halloween, Escape from New York. Charlotte and I watched Escape from New York the other day. The Thing is on there. They Live and Prince of Darkness. So there's like 6 of these movies that I just mentioned are on. I think The Fog might be also on Shudder. So they're not paying us. If they'd like to, they we'll take it. But
be
also,
nice, yeah, like be sponsored by something,
But
yeah, man,
they really are like the best for horror fans, especially horror fans who want to catch up on stuff they've missed.
Yeah, which
and
like
this
me,
is really, if even for John Carpenter fans, this is probably the movie that's going to slide through the cracks of all those movies. Like you said, you this is the first time you ever watched it.
Yeah.
Like this is that movie. Now I know he did other movies in the 90s that aren't as popular and very strange. Like he remade oh God, the movie with the blonde-haired kid, Village of the Damned. He remade Village of the Damned. He did that Invisible Man movie with Chevy Chase.
Memoirs of an Invisible Man, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, really, after that 10-year period, his only great horror film after that was really In the Mouth of Madness. Vampires was pretty cool, but, like, Escape from L.A., Ghosts of Mars,
yeah.
and then really after that he got into other fields, and he hasn't really made a movie since the early 2000s. So
yeah,
like if you want to appreciate the classics, then like Shudder has the few, and it's a good place to start.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and so we like appreciate you guys coming to us to just hear us talk about our horror movies that we enjoy, that we seek out, and we hope that we can steer you in the right direction. I was happy to watch this for the first time. I actually have not seen The Fog. I think I'll go check that out eventually, and I haven't seen In the Mouth of Madness either. So I have not completed the Apocalypse trilogy, but I'll do that soon.
Yeah, at least now you've watched them in order.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I have seen The Thing a few times. Yeah. But yeah, I'll have to get around to that eventually, because right now I'm in the middle of editing our 2 videos that are coming up soon. We plugged them at the beginning of the channel. We don't need to plug them again. But if you like interviews with horror writers, definitely like and subscribe. If you like hearing Danny talk about horror movies, then you should definitely subscribe to this channel, because my man puts out videos like multiple times a week. And we just got stuff coming from Shudder, from all the other streaming services, and yeah, we just love talking about this shit. So until then, try to stay cool and try not to get infected by any green particles. Yeah. And we'll talk to you guys real soon.